New Zealand. Thank you, sir.
The Honourable Mary Ann Street.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak to the Crown Minerals Amendment Act 2013 Amendment Bill. Mr Speaker, as my colleague Moana Maki said, this bill that we passed just a matter of weeks ago has now had to be resubmitted by the Minister because it was rushed through in a way that left it completely riddled with loopholes that the Minister had not spotted, had not been rigorous enough in his oversight of this bill to discern. But, Mr Speaker, I have a particular question relating to this issue, and it is that the bill, this bill is being so rushed, the members opposite wish it to pass through all its 3 stages under urgency, may mean, Mr Speaker, it's a bit of a conundrum, that it might come into force prior to the legislation it's designed to amend. The legislation it's designed to amend takes effect, as I understand it, as I recall it, on the 24th of May. Today, in parliamentary terms, although not in real-world terms, but today in parliamentary terms, it is the 16th of May under urgency. What happens if the royal assent is given to this amending legislation prior to the other legislation having been signed off, having reached its implementation date? Mr Speaker, I don't even know if the Minister has thought that far, because looking at the size of this amendment bill to the Amendment Act, one can only assume that he hardly reads past page 1, because he believes then that the officials are right and everything he does is backed up by officials and he can blame them later. Well, I'm sorry, Minister, I know this Minister is a new Minister, and I understand that it takes a little while to get the hang of the job. It is a very big job. But in the end, the policy and the legislation are the Minister's responsibility. We haven't had the primary legislation yet to arrive at its implementation date, and we are ramming through an amendment bill to that legislation. Lesson number 1 for new ministers: this isn't good enough. This is not good enough. The Minister has then compounded the errors by not producing a regulatory impact statement on the amendment bill. In fact, what we have tabled are the regulatory impact statements on the original bill, on the amendment bill, which was the first one that was passed a few weeks ago. So instead of taking a leaf out of Tony Ryle's approach to ministerial responsibility and blacking out large portions of regulatory impact statements, the Minister has become so scared of making a mistake now that he's refused to give Parliament a regulatory impact statement. So it's even worse than having a completely redacted regulatory impact statement. We don't have one at all. So now we are getting past the boundaries of the Minister's competence. And we can see that this is a chapter of errors from which I can only hope the Minister will learn if he wishes to remain in such a job at any time in the future, because this clearly is not good enough. We will, on the 16th of May, pass, because of the attrition of time, an amendment bill to an Amendment Act that hasn't even come into effect yet. But, Mr Speaker, one of the other things that there are a couple of other things I want to talk about, and one is the impacts on health and safety as well as environmental rules. Now, the previous member who spoke, Jonathan Young, who knows a bit about this because it's happening in his, well, just offshore from his electorate actually, and onshore at the north end of the electorate. He knows a little bit about this, and he assures us about how they have health and safety rules and regulations, and they have to have them signed off. I've been on those sites, Mr. Speaker. Yes, they do. They do have health and safety programs. But this legislation says that under the conditional permits, which are the ones that this amendment bill is seeking to add to the amendment bill that we passed a few weeks ago, that applicants no longer have to show that they have the ability to comply with health and safety or capability or environment tests associated with exploratory drilling, if at the time they do not intend to carry it out. So they're only required to meet the standards of health and safety and environment tests if they are committed to carrying out those activities at the start of what they're doing. So at the point of needing to conduct exploratory drilling, they can either sell it to another company and try meeting the tests themselves, but the risks open up a huge loophole in the health and safety provisions and in the environmental tests if not given proper scrutiny. Mr. Speaker, the theme of today under urgency is not giving things proper scrutiny. If this bill went to a select committee, came into effect after the primary legislation had come into effect, but was properly scrutinised through a select committee process, we might end up with sensible amendments and better amendments to the primary legislation than the Minister has come up with. At the moment, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, in looking at this bill as it stands, I don't know how these people who would apply for conditional permits would recruit to their companies and organisations. I don't know how the human rights manager would, human resources manager would advertise positions, perhaps with a name like "a job to die for." Perhaps that would be the tagline for the human resources manager. Mr. Speaker, these protections that we require in other legislation are being waived in the case of these conditional permits, and that is not good enough. The other thing that is of major concern to me, Mr. Speaker, is the extension of the ban on protesting. Not only does this government wish to control all levers of power within New Zealand, it wishes to reach out beyond our jurisdiction and exercise power outside of territories that are ours and, in fact, subject people to a stripping of human rights to lawfully protest out into way beyond the economic zone, beyond the EEZ to the continental shelf, where in fact international law would apply. And so this extension of something which already strips away the rights of legitimate protest now seeks to extend that beyond the bounds of this government's legitimate jurisdiction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.